Long before the legends of werewolves spread across medieval Europe, the Greeks told the story of the very first man ever to become a wolf, and in their version, it was not a curse caught by moonlight or a bite in the dark. It was a punishment. The man was Lycaon, a king of the wild land of Arcadia, and his name is the root of the word we still use for the werewolf condition, lycanthropy. But Lycaon was not turned into a wolf by accident or misfortune. He earned it through an act so monstrous that it nearly convinced the king of the gods to wipe out the entire human race. What could a man possibly do that would make Zeus himself decide that humanity was beyond saving? That is the dark heart of this story. Lycaon set out to test whether his divine guest was truly a god, and the test he chose was one of the most blasphemous crimes the Greeks could imagine. So tonight, you'll hear the real story of Lycaon, the impious king, the god who came to his table in disguise, the terrible meal he dared to serve, and how the first werewolf came howling into the world. If you enjoy these stories, take a moment to subscribe. It genuinely keeps this channel alive, and tell me in the comments which myth you'd like next. Now settle in and let's travel back to the wild hills of Arcadia. Arcadia was the wildest region of ancient Greece, a rugged country of forested mountains and lonely valleys, far from the great cities where people still lived close to the old, untamed ways. And its king, in the earliest days, was a man named Lycaon. By some accounts, Lycaon had begun as a civilizing ruler, a man who founded a city and taught his people the first rudiments of a settled life. But whatever good was once in him had long since curdled. He had fathered a great many sons, 50 of them, the old stories say, and together they had become a byword for arrogance and cruelty and contempt for the gods. In an age when piety meant everything, when the proper honoring of the gods was the very foundation of a decent life, Lycaon and his sons mocked it all. They were savage and lawless, and the rumors of their wickedness spread far beyond Arcadia, drifting up at last to the heights of Olympus itself. Now, the gods heard many such rumors about the doings of mortals, and usually they let the world run its course. But the reports of Lycaon were so persistent and so dark that they reached the ears of Zeus, the king of the gods, and Zeus decided to come down and see for himself whether the king of Arcadia was truly as monstrous as the stories claimed. Zeus did not come down in glory, with thunder and lightning and blazing majesty. He came in disguise, as he often did when he wished to walk among mortals and judge them honestly, this time in the humble form of a weary traveler, a common man seeking food and shelter for the night. This was the oldest and most sacred test in the Greek world. The law of hospitality was holy. To take in a stranger, feed him, and treat him with kindness was a sacred duty watched over by Zeus himself. How a man treated a poor traveler at his door revealed exactly what kind of man he truly was. So the disguised god made his way to the hills of Arcadia and came at last to the hall of King Lycaon, presenting himself as a humble guest in need of welcome. But as he arrived, Zeus gave the common people a sign, some small revelation that this traveler was no ordinary man, that a god had come among them. And the people of Arcadia responded as they should. They began to pray, to offer worship, recognizing that something divine had entered their land. Lycaon, however, saw the people bowing and praying to his guest, and instead of joining them, he sneered. He did not believe it for a moment. And he resolved, then and there, to find out whether this so-called god was anything of the kind. Lycaon's plan was twofold, and both halves of it broke the most sacred laws the Greeks knew. First, he decided to murder his guest. A true god, he reasoned, would surely know what was coming and could not be killed. If the traveler died in his sleep like any other man, then he was no god, and Lycaon would have proven the people fools. So the king resolved to fall upon his sleeping guest in the dead of night, a monstrous violation of the law of hospitality all on its own. But that was not enough for Lycaon. He wanted his test to be absolute, his contempt complete. And so he conceived something far worse. he would prepare a meal for his divine guest, and into that meal he would put human flesh. He would serve the god the cooked body of a victim and watch to see whether the all-knowing immortal noticed what he was eating. The old sources differ on who the victim was. Some say it was a hostage being held at his court. Some say, most horribly of all, that it was one of Lycaon's own kin, killed to provide the dish. Either way, the crime was the same, and it was the worst the Greek imagination could conjure: murder, the breaking of the sacred bond between host and guest, and the serving of human flesh, all at once, all to mock a god. And so the deed was done. The terrible dish was prepared and cooked and carried into the hall, and Lycaon, playing the gracious host, set it before his guest with every show of welcome, watching, all the while, out of the corner of his eye, to see whether the stranger would eat. It is worth pausing on the sheer audacity of it. Here was a mortal king, knowingly serving human flesh to a being his own people had just hailed as divine, gambling everything on the chance that the guest was an ordinary man who could be fooled and murdered and exposed. It was not a crime of passion or desperation. It was cold, deliberate blasphemy, designed to prove that nothing was sacred, not the gods, not the laws of hospitality, not human life itself. Lycaon believed he was being clever. He believed he was about to unmask a fraud. But of course, the guest at his table was no fraud and no ordinary man. It was Zeus, the king of the gods, the lord of the sky, and the guardian of the very laws Lycaon had just shattered, and he saw, instantly and completely, exactly what had been placed before him. He did not eat. He rose. And the wrath of the king of the gods broke over the hall of Lycaon like the end of the world. In that moment Zeus cast off all disguise, and the full and terrible majesty of the king of the gods filled the hall. The old poets describe him overturning the obscene table, scattering the cursed meal across the floor, his fury beyond anything words could hold. And then he reached for his weapon, the thunderbolt, the most fearsome power in all the cosmos, and brought down fire upon the house of Lycaon. The lightning struck the hall, and Lycaon's sons, the arrogant princes who had shared in their father's wickedness, were struck down where they stood, blasted by the wrath of heaven. The whole palace shook and burned around them. For the sons of Lycaon there would be no transformation, no second act, only the swift and total destruction that the gods reserved for those who had gone too far. But for Lycaon himself, the king who had conceived the whole monstrous scheme, Zeus had something else in mind. Death was too quick, too clean, a punishment for a man who had tried to feed a god, the flesh of the dead. Lycaon would not simply die. He would be made, on the outside, into the thing he had already become on the inside, and he would have to go on living as it. As the fire raged and the thunder rolled, the terrified king turned and fled from his burning hall, out into the wild night. And as he ran, the change came upon him. As Lycaon fled into the darkness, he tried to cry out and found that he could no longer form words. His shouts thickened and dropped into a long, low, mournful howl, the first such sound the world had ever heard from a creature that had once been a man. He looked down at his arms and saw them lengthening, darkening, sprouting coarse gray hair. His hands curled into clawed paws. His fine clothes seemed to melt into a pelt of bristling fur. His face stretched forward into a long snout lined with teeth, and his eyes, the old storytellers are careful to note this detail, his eyes stayed the same. The same cruel, glittering eyes he had always had, now set in the head of a beast. For that was the genius and the horror of the punishment. Zeus had not erased Lycaon, he had revealed him. The savagery, the bloodlust, the contempt for everything gentle and sacred that had always lived inside the king, all of it was now stamped onto his outward form for anyone to see. He had behaved like a ravening wolf among men. Now he would be a wolf in truth, driven out to haunt the wild places, to hunt and to howl and to live in fear of the very mankind he had once ruled. The first werewolf had been made, not by a bite, not by a curse of the moon, but by a god holding up a mirror to a monster. But the story of Lycaon does not quite end with his transformation, because his crime had consequences far larger than himself. Zeus returned to Olympus, shaken and enraged by what he had seen in the Hall of Arcadia, and he no longer believed that Lycaon was a single rotten exception. If one king could sink to such depths, the god reasoned, then the whole human race had grown corrupt beyond saving. The wickedness he had witnessed convinced Zeus that mankind was a failed experiment, and he resolved to do something drastic, to wash the entire race away and begin again. This is how the Greeks connected the tale of Lycaon to their version of the Great Flood, the deluge that Zeus would soon send to drown the corrupt world, sparing only a single righteous couple, Deucalion and his wife, to begin the human story over from the beginning. So Lycaon was not only the first werewolf. He was, in a sense, the man whose monstrous crime nearly ended humanity altogether, the final proof, in the eyes of the king of the gods, that the world as it stood deserved to be swept clean. One king's blasphemy, on one dark night in the hills of Arcadia, had brought the whole of mankind to the very edge of destruction. It is easy to see why this story endured and why versions of it echo through so many cultures. The idea of a man who becomes a beast speaks to something we all quietly recognize. The Greeks were not really frightened of wolves in the forest. They were frightened of the wolf in the man, the cruelty and the savagery that civilization, hospitality, and reverence for the gods were meant to hold in check. Lycaon was a king who threw all of those restraints away, who decided that nothing was sacred and that he could mock the gods and butcher the helpless without consequence. And the punishment fit the crime exactly. A man who had made himself a monster on the inside was simply given the outside to match. There is something almost honest about it. Zeus did not invent Lycaon's savagery, he only made it visible, so that the king could no longer hide behind his crown and his hall and his fine words. Perhaps that is the quiet warning the Greeks meant to leave us with, that the things we do again and again slowly shape what we become, and that a man who lives like a beast may one day look down and find that he has the paws to prove it. If this is the kind of story you want more of, take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments which myth I should tell next. Sleep well.